portal, an artificial portal in the rock wall, which, when it was fully operational, looked like an open tunnel, was illuminated for reasons I do not understand, and the electronics, the computers, and the persons working this would set it up to be able to go to any physical location on this planet from Montauk Point. It would literally transport you from point A to point B instantaneously, or almost instantaneously. Not absolute instantaneity, but within a second or two. And maintain, if you wanted, the same time frame as we were working in at that time, or shift time reference, past or future. When they finally got these tunnels working, and working satisfactorily, of course, they could pick a person up, move them where they want, pull them across the country, pull them from another country, put them in another project, and then return them. And since they could shift time, they could use you for weeks or months and then put you back in the time point where you left, within a few milliseconds, if you will. This automatically erases the memories without any effort on their part, because the subconscious mind will reject, and the conscious mind working with it will reject, the idea that you may have worked months on a project where only a fraction of a second has expired in your alleged real-time reality. At this point, one must wonder, how can this happen? And one also has to look at a larger picture. Albert Einstein, going back for a moment to the Philadelphia experiment era, had created in 1929 the unified field theory. On his public record, he offered it. Lord Russell of England read it, and he said, there's things in here which literally are too far advanced for humanity at this time. He said, I suggest, speaking to Einstein, that you withdraw this and say it has errors or whatever you want to do, but just withdraw it. And Einstein did. It's not well known that it was offered and then withdrawn, but the public record says that it was never completed. They kept saying he found errors and so forth. The facts are that in 1938 the unified field theory was completed, but it was classified and is still classified to this day. It became part of the theoretical background for the Philadelphia experiment. But it also, in the process of looking at this and other things, as I did, one has to understand that there are multiple realities. Physically, we only know this one. And we work in it, we live in it, and so forth. But as some of the mathematics of various people show, not only Hilbert, but also a well-known mathematician scientist from Stanford, SRI, Dr. Tiller, has pointed out that there are multiple parallel realities and we can be part of any one of them, and it is possible to shift. And of course what he pointed out was we are in what, let us say for reference, we are in number one. Whether or not we are in number one is another matter. We are in a reality which we accept and we know, and we do not know of or sense these parallel realities. Part of the work at Montauk was to access these parallel realities and also to manipulate time in such a manner that it becomes virtually impossible to know what your reality is that you're in when you're working at Montauk or on a Montauk-type project. And it may be totally skewed from the reality which I, speaking to you through this camera, and other people perhaps watching this know. And as Alfred Bilek, the engineer, knew. You get to the point, finally, what is reality? What do we really know about it? The function of Montauk was to explore, their official charter said their function was to explore all aspects of reality, physics, and whatever else they could find, and time. And of course, reports were made on a regular basis. Where they all went, we don't know. But I spent many years there on that project. I got off the UFO project after a while. I was involved in several other projects, including some of the time tunnel project, which involved travel to other locations. And I will fill you in on a little of this. One of the other projects involved, of course, what I will report on openly is the Montauk Boys. Now, what was the Montauk Boys project? It started officially about 1976. There was a lot of precursor work in which I will have to go into a great deal of history, because this all involves mind manipulation and mind control. The project formally started at Montauk. And I'm talking about that aspect dealing with the boys, males, who were under mind control manipulation. The overall project heading, which covered both this aspect and the older cult techniques for females, was Project Monarch. Project Monarch, briefly, was a name given to the whole area involving mind manipulation and mind control. The old cult techniques going back thousands of years were used on females, taking them basically from families who had known at least 3 generations of child abuse, sexual child abuse, and these females would be preconditioned, if you will, for the training they would receive to split their mind further and set them up to be sex slaves or whatever else they wanted them for. These were mind control female slaves, and they would last a certain number of years. Kathy O'Brien, in her book, The Transformation of America, is one outstanding example of this type of thing using the older techniques. The newer techniques were physical at first, then electronic, but involved primarily the use of boys because of the chakra setup in the human body of the male. It is not identical to that of the female. The polarities are reversed. Therefore, it became easier to work on males. The object was to see if they could produce a complete set of mind-controlled, subconsciously implanted, and externally triggered on demand at the time that they wanted, a person who was totally programmed to do something, but this person obviously would know nothing about it, and would live a normal life, or what appeared to be a normal life, and could be at a later time utilized for some project, whether it's government-sponsored or not, didn't matter. Whoever had the controls, had the reins on these individuals, the handlers, if you will, working for whomever they worked for, would be able to trigger these programmed people to do whatever they wanted them to do at some future time. Being in this project for a number of years, I asked questions. I never got many answers. What did they want them for? I never got an answer. But of course, looking at current history as well as the recent, let's say, 10 years, it became fairly obvious. There's a lot of assassinations. There's a lot of killings in the schoolyard, which are all basically all Montauk Boy projects, where they were controlled to create the killing and the situation, which is, of course, forced the desire for further gun control. This is one aspect of the whole situation. Other things that can be used for, of course, are assassins, agitators, create fires, create riots. If you use your imagination, literally anything possible in the gamut of riots, subversion of normal society, spies, in your imagination, you would probably be able to name virtually anything that these boys could be set up for. At this point, we'll take a slight break, and we'll continue with what is a Montauk Boy and how are these programs done. In reference to the Montauk Project, I want to show you at least one picture. There are many that have been taken of Montauk. All that I have, of course, been taken after the project was down and collapsed. There's one particular one, though, that I think is perhaps the symbol of Montauk, and that's the radar tower. I'm going to put that up and show it. This picture is significant because the radar tower was built in the late 40s, early 50s as part of the early SAGE radar warning system, which was perfected engineering-wise at Montauk and then the beam used, but that was part of the SAGE system. And it's become, you might say, a symbol of Montauk. Some people say Montauk doesn't exist. They don't know what they're talking about because the whole physical structure is still there. The underground has been sealed off since. What are we talking about when we say a Montauk Boy? That is an appellation, a term we coined, meaning a young boy. I do not mean a young adult. It's actually around the age of puberty, though, of course, this has been ongoing since '76, who has been run through the program to be literally programmed. The selection is, of course, around the age of puberty, And it's a nickname we've put on them because they've been programmed and went through Montauk. Today it doesn't mean that they all went through Montauk because there are many other facilities which now are operational to produce the, quote, Montauk boy, unquote. Let us go back a little bit briefly in terms of history in this century. I'm not talking about ancient history. As to what mind control is about and who got involved with the project and what various little rivulets, if you will, all came together to produce the mainstream called mind control and the Montauk boy. There were, of course, various psychologists and psychiatrists in the past that have been involved in the periphery of this. It came from Europe, basically, and one of the original people who got involved with this directly was Dr. Wilhelm Reich. He was a student of Sigmund Freud of Vienna, came to the United States in about 1943. I'm referring, of course, to Dr. Wilhelm Reich. Took up residence in Long Island. Then in 46, 47, he moved up to Rangeley, Maine, and put his main laboratory facility up there. In 1947, he was offered and accepted a contract with the CIA, newly formed, which basically was related to finding a function as to how can a person be deprogrammed. This was the way the contract read. How can the person be deprogrammed, and also can you increase the psychic abilities of young people who already exhibit such abilities? Reich signed the contract. It was a 5-year-long contract. And about halfway through it, he realized that this wasn't all that the CIA wanted, and they had misrepresented to him, because what they really wanted was a means for programming as well as deprogramming. One is the opposite side of the coin of the other. And yes, they definitely did want to find ways to make psychics more psychic. That perhaps was part of the same program. Actually, it became separate. Reich went through about 2.5 years of this at Rangeley, and then he decided he wasn't going to give the CIA the notes which he was generating. So he falsified the records about the last 2.5 years, but this was not known to the CIA at that time. In 1952, he says, I'm not renewing the contract. I've done my work, and this is it, and I'm going to do other things on my own after that. Well, at that point, the CIA didn't know, and of course NSA was directly involved in this also, that perhaps the records had been falsified. To go ahead a bit in time, to the period sometime in the 60s, Preston Nichols, who was a surplus electronics dealer and was working for a corporation on the island and had a great deal of interest in Wilhelm Reich, and of course Reich being dead since 1957, they were slowly breaking up his estate and breaking up and selling various pieces of his estate, known as Orgone energy accumulators and a lot of other hardware. It showed up at various surplus places. Preston had an interest in it and used to go see what was available. Occasionally bought something. At one of these meets, after looking us over, he asked the person who was exhibiting and trying to sell the Reich equipment, is this all you have? He says, well, no. He says, really, you need to get in touch with one of the curators and the people who are holding the rest of Reich's estate. He said he has a home in another location in Vermont that very few people know about. It's not just Rangeley, Maine. He said he had another home. Call so-and-so and contact him, go up and see him. He may have something you may be more interested in. Preston did this, was invited up there and went up and looked around, saw much of the same thing, and then asked, well, what else do you have? And this man says, well, I've got some notebooks. These notebooks, I'd like to see them. So Preston looked at them, and they were all handwritten in Reich's handwriting. He recognized it from some other documents he'd seen, and realized these might be very important notebooks. So he asked the man how much you want for them. He says, make an offer. Preston did. He bought them, took them home. About 2 months later, he gets a call from somebody in the NSA. It says, I understand, the person on the other end saying, I understand that you have bought some notebooks of Wilhelm Reich's. And he said, yes, I bought them, they're mine. Well, we need them. Well, they're legally mine. You can't have them. Well, NSA said, we need them. We have reason to believe that a good part of the material which was given to us by Reich is in error deliberately, and it's been falsified. You may have the originals which we need. So Preston made a deal with him, which basically said NSA would give Preston the missing notes that he didn't have if he, Preston, would give the NSA and CIA copies of what he had. And part of the agreement was that he would never show the complete notebooks to anyone as long as he lived, which he agreed to. So he wound up with the complete notes, and so did CIA and NSA, which is what they wanted. That, of course, went on to be used later on as part of the Montauk Boy program. What Reich had basically discovered, and this is an extremely important point, was that there is a point in which you can gain access to the subconscious mind. And as later research showed, there's more than one subconscious mind. There's about 12 levels. But you can access it with the conscious mind under one condition, and that is the point of orgasm. I won't go into any of the details, of course, of what Reich had to do up there to find this out. But there was years of experimentation. At that point, the two minds join, and you can remove information from the subconscious through the conscious, or put information in, and then you can give instruction with the subconscious. This memory will be held separate from the conscious mind and cannot be accessed without such and such code number or code words, or however they wanted to work it. He found that that was a key element. In other words, Mr. Sigmund Freud was not exactly wrong when he said sex is almost the most important thing in life. He became known, that is Freud, as something of a sex maniac. He wasn't. He was trying to point out that it plays a more important part in our life than most people realize. Not particularly or necessarily in part of the sex act, but because of the relationships through the conscious and subconscious minds. This became an important point, and of course there was other work being done in that same time period. I'm sure you've heard, or some people have heard, of MK-Ultra and that whole project involving LSD and other mind-bending chemicals, conducted initially by Dr. Ewing Cameron for the CIA, in which he conducted this program in Canada. The CIA felt it was too hot to handle in the U.S., so they sent him to Canada, and eventually the Canadian government and people found out about it, and he was almost thrown out of Canada. But he uncovered the fact that these mind-bending chemicals can be used as part of a programming technique. There are many ends, many loose pieces had to come together so that all of these rivulets provided a mainstream whereby there's a base of knowledge which could be used for programming someone. In the process, they also found, and this was somewhat later, that the human mind, and Tesla did a lot of the early research on this, I might add, that the human mind can be accessed by electronic means, RF carriers at the proper high frequencies, when they are essentially converted into a scalar waveform. Scalar mathematically is second order, electromagnetic propagation is first order. And if you do it in a scalar form, the human mind, the brain, is very receptive to scalar energies. In fact, it can act like a direction finder to locate the source of the energy. But it will pick this information up if it's transmitted in scalar form as a direct input to the mind, as if you heard it spoken. Now, this became very important as part of the project for the Montauk Boys and the final stages of programming. All of these ideas came together, and they tried in the earliest phases, around 1975-76, to program these boys in a very physical way. I don't want to go into gross details, but basically you had to make a physical connection between two males. The programmer was a male, and the typical and primary programmer in the early days was my brother Duncan. He got hold into this project, as did Preston Nichols. Preston Nichols set up the programming, and he will admit it today openly, so I'm not afraid to say it. But he set up the programming for the Montauk Boys program and the techniques involved in programming. And Preston had to use Duncan and some others in the earlier phases of the programming. Now, there are some peculiarities of the human nervous system. I don't know how many people have seen Gray's Anatomy or books like that and show the whole setup of the nervous system, which does not show and include, of course, the setup of the chakras in the human body, the energy chakras, which are semi-physical. There are 8 chakras. Yogis teach 7. They're in error. There's 8. The 8th one is the crown chakra over the head. But they are in opposing pairs, a polarity. Number 1 chakra, the base, if you say, and call it arbitrarily, positive. The second one is negative, positive, negative, and so forth, until you get to the top of the 8th chakra, which will be, quote, negative, whatever that means. I'm just doing this for the purpose of showing there's an opposition of polarity. Because the first chakra in the male is a sex chakra, it becomes easily manipulable. In the female, the whole polarity is reversed. Females could not be used in the techniques used for the Montauk boys, not until very much later. The programming being quite physical, and they pick these victims, and I do have to use the word victims, around the age of puberty, because at that point, the male or boy, well, for that matter females, but particularly males, are most amenable to mind manipulation. After the age of about 17, people start, particularly males, to get a mindset, and it becomes much more difficult to modify their mind and put in this mindset that they want, rather than the one which develops naturally, and bury all kinds of things in the subconscious. So typically they're all chosen around puberty, which can be anywhere from the age 11 to 16, depending on when the person becomes sexually active. Puberty in the South is much earlier than in the North, and of course there are all kinds of personal variations, and a candidate who is sought out, of course this is one of the things they have to look at. They have to make sure that he's gone through the puberty period and that pubescence has already occurred. They select also on the basis of IQ, at least 100. They wanted somebody who's at least normal IQ. If they're up in the 200 region, that's fine. They're useful for other projects, other than the normal ones. And they all had to go basically through the same process, but they also looked at them in terms of genetics. When the program originally started at Montauk, they were all Caucasians. White-skinned, fair-haired, typically blonde-haired, blue-eyed. And in the process of recovering my memories, after this was all over in '83, phase 1, of course, in '83, and I started reviewing this and coming up with the information, I said, well, this, to me, smacks like one of the old Nazi projects, the super race projects. And in some respects, that was true. The candidates were chosen on that basis originally, at least at Montauk. As I found out some years later, there was a parallel project being run by